Kia ora and hello. This is going to be a bit of a quick breakdown of the Star Wars timeline and what movies, shows and games fit where. To start with, I quickly wanted to go over two terms I'm going to be using a lot in this video, and that is the term canon and legends. If I say something is canon, that means it is currently accepted as a story that fits into the Star Wars universe, or the canon. Most of the canon material is in the main movies, and then anything that has come out since Disney bought Lucasfilm back in 2012. Legends refers to collections of games, books or comics that came out before Disney bought Lucasfilm that is now not considered canon, as they wanted to pretty much have a fresh palette to create their Disney Star Wars masterpiece. In doing so, they threw out a bunch of what I consider to be some of the best Star Wars stories ever told, for them to replace with some actual doo-doo. Anyway, to get started, what I thought I would show this graphic that breaks it down quite nicely, and then I'll discuss each era, what is going on, and what stories exist there for now. So the first one, the Dawn of the Jedi. In terms of current canon, we know pretty much nothing about this era. It is set thousands of years before the movies, when, surprise surprise, the Jedi are just beginning. All we know is James Mangold is currently going to be directing a film set in this era that may come out in a few years, fingers crossed. He's made awesome movies such as Logan and Ford vs Ferrari, so I have high hopes for this movie, which he describes as a biblical epic. Tough comparison comparing his new movie to the greatest story ever told, but could be good. Alright, now moving on to my favourite era, the Old Republic. The Jedi and Sith both number in the thousands. A huge galaxy-wide war's going on. Still thousands of years before any Skywalkers show up. Awesome characters like Revan, Malgus, Satele Shan. This era was introduced by BioWare when they made their game Knights of the Old Republic, which I think is one of the greatest stories in a video game ever told. It has expanded even more in the MMO Star Wars The Old Republic, and man, I sunk some hours in this one. Sadly, this era has been relegated to legends, so in the current canon we actually do not know a lot about this era. There are vague hints that pop up here and there, but apart from that, I'm really just hoping we get some quality Old Republic or era content, and that they don't mess it up. Next up, the High Republic. From what I understand, the High Republic era is about 1,000 years predating the Phantom Menace and all the other Star Wars movies. It is a time where the Sith have pretty much been eliminated, and the Republic and Jedi are both thriving. It is an era of exploration and expansion for the Galactic Republic, and probably the height of the Jedi Order, hence the name, the High Republic. We have a few different books and comics and graphic novels depicting the era in canon, as well as elements of this time period appearing in the recent Jedi Survivor game. The upcoming Disney Plus series, The Acolyte, is supposedly set in this era as well, probably more towards the end of it. If we go on to the next era, the Fall of the Jedi, I would say it probably stretches from about Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, to Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. This era has a lot more canon material in it. We start with Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, then Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. There is 10 years between these movies, and we have not got a lot of content that is set between them. I think there's some really good potential there for some interesting stories to come through. Then right after Attack of the Clones, there is the Clone Wars animated movie, and then the 7 seasons of the Clone Wars that takes us right up to Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. The Clone Wars, man, that is phenomenal. And it is a bit of a grind, and the first couple seasons have some average episodes, but it has some of the most interesting Star Wars stories ever put out there. There's also the Tales of the Jedi show. The first season of that also takes place mostly during this era, and adds a lot to both Count Dooku and Ahsoka's overall story. The next era is then the Reign of the Empire. It follows the creation and growth of the Galactic Empire and stretches about 20 years from Revenge of the Sith up to Episode 4, A New Hope. In between these two, we have the animated show, The Bad Batch, which in its first 2 seasons changes how the Empire are making, shows how the changes the Empire are making from the perspective of clones, from directly after Episode 3. Then there is the Solo movie, which is set about 9 years after Revenge of the Sith. So pretty much exactly between Episodes 3 and 4. Just after that is the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, which is set 10 years after Episode 3. About 14 to 15 years after Revenge of the Sith, so closer to A New Hope, comes Star Wars Rebels, another animated show, similar to the Clone Wars, that has a bit of a slow start, but ended up being an incredible show. That stretches up until just about Rogue One and A New Hope. We also have the Andor show in this time period, which is very different from anything else and really is very good. Then Rogue One, which leads directly into A New Hope. Amongst all these are many books, comics and video games, which are all canon. The highlights for me are Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy, and both the Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor video games, which tell the tale of Cal Kestis. Right, next up we have the Age of Rebellion. I would say this goes from about the end of episode 4, where they just destroy the first Death Star, until the Rebels blow up the second one in Return of the Jedi. There's a few comics and books that are in between these movies, but this era is mostly captured in the movies. Episode 4, A New Hope, then Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, and lastly Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. These movies span about 3 years in the timeline and is mostly the story of Luke Skywalker and all his buddies taking down the Empire. Following this is the era of the New Republic. After they have mostly defeated the Empire, the Rebel Alliance forms the New Republic. There are a few books that tell the story which leads to a climactic battle on Jakku in Chuck Wendig's trilogy. It is also depicted in the campaign for the video game Star Wars Battlefront 2. 5 years into this era, so 5 years after Return of the Jedi, of the New Republic growing and the Empire fading, we get the Mandalorian show, the Book of Boba Fett, and soon to be the Ahsoka series as well. This era lasts about 30 years from Return of the Jedi up until then The Force Awakens. So I would say this is probably the focus of the Star Wars storytelling for the moment, with most of the shows coming out in this time. And it's supposedly supposed to culminate in an upcoming movie where all the shows connect into an in-game style film created by Dave Filoni. Then we have the rise of the First Order. After the Empire was defeated, a few of the leftovers go into the unknown regions of space and regather their forces, becoming the First Order. They blast onto the scene in The Force Awakens by blowing up the main worlds of the New Republic, and they run things for about a year before in Rise of Skywalker they are supposedly defeated once and for all. To be honest, this era is a bit of a mess, as a lot happens very quickly. It starts with Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Directly after this is Episode 8, The Last Jedi. And then a year after this movie is Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. The First Order was able to take over so easily because the New Republic was adamant of demilitarizing themselves after they considered the Empire was defeated. So when the First Order rocked up, all that was left was pretty much the Resistance. A group led by Princess Leia, who knew there was still a threat out there and didn't want to disband the entire military. The Resistance show also fits in between these movies, but to be honest, I don't think it's really worth watching unless you're about 5 years old. Okay, after the Rise of the First Order is defeated, the era of the New Jedi Order begins. We know nothing about this era, except that Rey is now building up the New Jedi. There is supposed to be an upcoming movie that will address this era, set 20 years after Rise of Skywalker, where we can learn more about this time period, but for the most part this era is mostly empty as of now. So that's it. This is a brief overview of the Star Wars timeline so far. I've covered most of the main movies, shows, games and books, but of course some I've skipped over. If you have any questions about where something fits or if something is canon or not, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching and like and subscribe!